friends. This is Chris. Just doing a little quick intro. It's been a very busy past couple weeks. Today is also the start of the last week of school. For those that don't know, I've been an EA for the past couple months. So it's just been a very busy time and stressful and all that. So I was I did fully intend to have a new episode ready for today, but by the time the day was done and you're covered in at times bites and bruises and stuff, it's just like, you know what, I need to veg. So there will be a new episode in the coming weeks. Next 2 weeks we'll have a brand new episode. I've already got the topic in mind. It's just going to be with some R&R. Starting the end of this week, I'll be able to actually sit down and record that. So in the meantime, I hope you're able to enjoy this trip down memory lane as you join myself and my brother Dave in a conversation we had way back in 2018, which feels like a friggin' lifetime ago. Actually, in a couple months, it'll have been 5 years, but that 5 years feels like 20. Um, as we're talking about some of our favorite aspects of Star Trek, especially at that time. This was before Picard had dropped and all that. So, hope you enjoy and God bless, my friends. Peace.
Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio, and today we are joined by first-time guest, longtime brother, like actual brother, not brother from another mother, brother from the same mother, David Cooke.
Hey!
Dave,
I'm here.
Yes, Dave, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Good.
Yeah.
We are here celebrating this, the day after my day of birth, which is just a funny way of saying we're having a family get-together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you do when if the family get together, but you and I basically just
leave people and go record a podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
It's similar to how we are when we were at the family get-together, because right now we're just recording the conversation that we normally have in front of a group of people, who would then start to ignore us and talk about their own thing.
Within reason, yeah.
Occasional input here and there, but we go deeper than they do, except for Jill. But Jill's like, I'm not ready to do a podcast, so I'm out.
Okay.
So, my good sir, what are we talking about today?
I think Star Trek, apparently.
Yes. As you can tell, we are very prepared.
Totally. I have pages upon pages of notes. Listen to me shuffle through them right now.
Shuffle.
See, my sounded a little bit better.
See, unlike you, though, if I had, I mean the notes I totally have. They are just right here on my phone, which you can't even hear me slide across because it's on silent mode.
But for those of you listening, there's definitely a phone in his hand with notes. Totally, for sure.
Hundo P. Yeah, no, we've got nothing. This is It was kind of funny because I was mentioning the other day. I was like, you and I were going to do a podcast about Star Trek, and then someone adorably said, like, I need to watch the show a bunch, like, just so I could speak with some authority. And I was just kind of like, what authority? We're just kind of stating our opinion. And then also to that person, I was like, you've watched a bunch of Trek, so your point is coming from... I don't speak with any authority. I speak with conviction about my opinions, but...
And some of them are right.
And most of them are.
That last part's questionable.
But it's just like, yeah, I haven't revisited any of the shows recently. Like, last year, I rewatched a bunch of DS9. I got to a point where other shows were starting to capture me, so then I was just like, this is on Netflix, I'll come back to it. And Next Gen, as much as I love Next Gen, and to me, that might be what I most closely associate with Trek, just because for me, and for you, because you're only like a year and a half older than me, like when we grew up, that was the Trek that was on TV for us. And there was the old crew motion pictures, but for the most part, we didn't even get the good ones. Because we got 5, 6 is alright, and I think 6 came out when you were born, or when I was born, I can't remember. But then we got Generations and meh. But then we got friggin' the amazing First Contact.
Yeah, and, I mean, I think, like, when I think of, like, the first Star Trek show I remember specifically watching would be DS9.
Really?
Yeah, because I remember seeing Next Generation, but it wasn't something that we sort of specifically went out of our way to watch. And I think part of it was it started like we were toddlers.
Right.
And so there was a stretch where I remember, I don't know, as a kid thinking like, oh, this is some boring adults show. And of course I have like since watched it and have realized the error of my ways. But I remember
except for season 1. Let's just get that out of the way.
But DS9 when it started, I remember like specifically all of us watching that together.
Well, that's the thing. I remember, like, I have fond memories, family memories of us and Mom and Dad when he was alive. Like we of course did other things, and we were involved in some school activities, but a lot of our family bonding time as well was like when we did stuff together, it was watch shows. We'd watch Next Gen. Like, granted, when Next Gen started, like, it came out the year I was born, so boom, lucky me. And, like, as it went on, like, by the time DS9 rolled out in 94-ish.
Sure.
93, 94.
Sure,
so
why
yeah,
not?
around that time we'd actually start to pay more attention aside from Power Rangers, which, by the by, still awesome. Anyways, sorry. And then we got into Voyager, and that was a good time for Trekkies, because it was, I think they, like, the start of Next Gen was the start of something no other show had, where it was, except for maybe Law and Order, where it was an uninterrupted, like, 13 or 14-year stretch of non-stop television.
Yeah.
Because seven of Next Gen, 7 of DS9, 7 of Voyager. There was a planned 7 of Enterprise, because 7 became the goal, but it got to 4.
And yeah, unfortunately that was cut short.
Yeah, but in that time there was also like 3, somewhere, I think 5 motion pictures in that time as well, at least.
Yeah.
Because you had the 3 Next Gens, and I think because the Voyage Home, I think that's the 4th one, the 6th one.
Generations, I know, was the one where they did the transition between the two, and that one definitely came out while TNG was still running. I'm not a...
It came out during its last season, and the writers and the showrunners were split between, and both have been like, man, we should have just released the series finale as the movie, because the series finale for TNG they felt was so much better than the Generations movie.
Yeah, I don't really remember much about that one, which means I haven't rewatched it, which is probably enough of a hint as to, like, how good it was or wasn't, in my mind anyway.
Yeah, and the reason that made me remember 6 coming out during the time TNG was on was because Worf, whose actor Michael Dorn?
Michael Dorn.
Yeah, Michael Dorn played an ancestor of Worf in that movie as an advocate for Kirk.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
They threw him a bone. Well, not threw him a bone. It was a way of getting, like, a next-gen cast member, like a current Trek guy in an old Trek movie. That was kind of interesting. You mentioned DS9 as the time you started watching. And DS9 is an interesting one in Trek fandom, I think, just because it, like, TNG is, in my mind, that's what I associate with as Trek. But that being said, and I think DS9 is kind of almost like the pinnacle of what Trek in a way could be, in the sense of it was the one that kind of cracked the code onto how can we have engaging stories where, sorry, I'm going on a side tangent. Like, so many people hold Trek and the current films, even any film that's not the boring Trek the Motion Picture, as, like, not up to Roddenberry's standard. Roddenberry would have hated this because it was no conflict and all that. And that's boring. TNG figured out a way to do it. The older Trek movies figured out a way to how to have some interpersonal conflict, but his whole thing was like, no, there's no conflict. We've reached a utopia. We're perfect and all that. And the thing I loved about DS9, especially upon rewatching, is, like, you see, like, no, yes, we're in this hypothetical situation, like in this fantasy, we are better people than we are now. But there's still conflict because people suck.
Well, I mean, in fairness, though, for the most part, like when you look at DS9, It's definitely a darker show.
Yeah.
Of all the other ones, there is interpersonal conflict, like that does happen. But I think in a lot of ways, it still maintains that bright, shiny vision of the future, which is really exciting. I mean, I love a lot of sci-fi, but a ton of it is, kind of, just bleak and, almost not post-apocalyptic in genre, but post-apocalyptic in feel. It's like, oh, everything's crappy. And DS9 still maintains that. I think what DS9 does really well is that it goes, yes, humanity has achieved, this utopian society and lasting peace, but we live in a galaxy with other groups of people who don't share those same ideals, who we have to interact with, who might want to wage war against us and subjugate us, and how do we stand up for what we believe, to be true and right? What does that look like, in the face of military conquest?
Right.
And so I think, in some ways, it's fair to say that DS9 is the least utopian of them all, but also, I think it still maintains that like bright vision of the future while sort of putting it to the test. And I think the cool thing is that it emerges from that okay.
Yeah. I guess what I mean by that is if I had a close comparison to another franchise that you and I both love deeply in Star Wars, one of my favorite things out of Rogue One, aside from the whole bloody movie, because the movie's amazing, was the finally getting to see, like, no, the rebels, they had to do some shady crap.
Yeah.
So their whole thing is like, we want to overthrow and free the galaxy, but all the movies and the current trilogy, because let's be honest, First Order's the Empire.
Yeah.
The Resistance is the Rebellion, and we are still in the original trilogy.
Well, I mean, I'm really looking forward to Return of the Jedi, which is going to be the third one of the new trilogy.
Although the last one was an Empire Strikes Back. But let's save this for a Star Wars one. But the thing I loved with Rogue One is you finally saw, like, the rebels, the good guys, no, they were totally willing and underhandedly getting their hands dirty to accomplish their goals. And DS9, in some ways, was willing to explore that. Like, that the Federation that was held up as the, like, humanity is this pinnacle of peace, it's this pinnacle of virtue. Like, we are advanced, we are beyond money and all that. DS9 rolls out Section 31.
Yeah.
Which was crazy interesting. It might be more interesting on paper than it necessarily was in execution.
I think they kind of overdid it a little bit, but yeah.
But when they first brought it in and hinted at, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Because that's not something that had ever really been explored in Trek, but it would line up with human history. It would line up with current human history, and it's something that you could totally believe would still happen, like in this utopia where they're in the show, they're like, we do not acknowledge Section 31. We do not condone Section 31.
I mean, the vast majority of people would be appalled by it.
Yeah.
And yet they've managed to find a small subset of people who are willing to, for the most part, throw their ideals aside in order to defend their ideals.
Well, and then you've also got, even though a lot of people are appalled by it, there's not a lot of people who are like, as the show goes on, you find out more in the Federation know about it, where they're like publicly against it, but they're absolutely okay in accepting the outcomes because the outcomes favor them.
Yeah.
So that I found crazy interesting. And then even though Nemesis, it was Next Gen movies. It was First Contact. No, Insurrection. Sorry. Insurrection had a somewhat similar theme where they were you were finding some of the Federation Council people were starting to be like, you know what? Screw it. If this is going to favor us, like, we're willing to ignore things.
Well, we had the evil admiral trope, which is something that comes up with some amount of frequency in Star Trek.
Which makes sense, though. Like, to give them credit, he wasn't like full on like, I'm evil for evil's sake.
Yeah.
Like, he made a moral argument where you're like, we can understand
Yeah.
and he was being played by the true villain.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But you could understand where he was coming from, but it was messed up.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've actually, on the topic of Insurrection, as much as it wasn't my favorite movie, like
It was a great episode, though.
I've read detailed arguments as to why actually, like, he was right.
Yeah.
And that, like, the Federation, you know, that Jean-Luc Picard and crew were actually in the wrong in that movie, and they were being dumb, and, you know. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're supposed to be the good guys and condemning people to die. But anyway.
I think it was probably more so the methods of it. It's like, we're going to cloak and dagger sneak these people out of their homes, off their planet in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then we're going to reap the rewards, where it's like, look, if you just try to explain the situation, these people seem pretty chill.
Yeah.
They might go along with this.
Yeah.
But yeah, the next gen movies outside of First Contact weren't that good.
No, but,
Yeah.
I mean, we still had First Contact, which was amazing.
Which was amazing. So, out of Trek, what would you say is your favorite?
Series?
Series or movie?
Well, I'll do movie first, because that one's easy. First Contact.
Even above Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I just Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
Like Patrick Stewart, they do it so well, and I think the high point in that movie is when Jean-Luc is in his office and he's adjusting the phaser again.
Oh yeah, the speech.
Yeah, the speech of.
Not again. The line must be drawn.
The line must be drawn here.
Yeah.
And I'm totally gonna forget her name.
Acting.
But the lady from Earth at the time, you know.
Yeah, I can't remember the character's name, but I think her name is Alfred Wood.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
But and you know, she kind of calls him on
his crap.
And like, you're being Ahab here. You're sacrificing everything to get your whale. And he realizes that she's right.
Yeah. Which I think was also not only a good analogy for the character in that, I think it was also done deliberately, just because Patrick Stewart had played Ahab in a TV movie based on Moby Dick.
I did not know
so
that.
It was just a little thing tossed in there.
But, I mean, it was just... That scene in that movie is absolutely phenomenal. And that's what I think raises it to me in terms of, you know, the best Star Trek movie.
Yeah. I'll be honest, and it's something you and I have talked about a bunch of times, like, I'm on the record, I guess, as saying, like, the original series, out of the shows I've continuously watched, is probably my least favorite. It's hard for me to get into. I like some of the movies. The movies are excellent, and I like reading about the time. And that amazing DS9 episode, Trials and Tribulations, where they go back and it was for an anniversary, was amazing. And integrating that. But that got me excited. But the thing that got me more excited about it was the technical aspects of recreating something earlier in the 90s, but then also taking these characters that I actually do have a care and attachment to, like, back with them. I just found the original series very difficult for me to get into. Not even because of the time. Like, you can forgive stuff at the time because of the time they were created. Classic Doctor Who is hard for me to get into just because it's a very different show than what it is now. I love reading about Classic Who, or comics based on Classic Who, but actually sitting down and trying to watch Classic Who, that is tough.
Now, the last time we chatted, I gave you...
I haven't had the chance to watch him yet.
I'm
sorry.
I know. So, I mean, I have not watched all of TOS.
Right.
I kind of want to. There's some solid episodes in there. There's some good ones. There's also some that are, like, a little bit tougher to get through, is what I'll go with. You know, the pacing's slower, and sometimes that's awesome, and sometimes it drags.
Well, there's a difference between a good slow burn and just slow.
Exactly. And I think some of those episodes are just slow. But there are a couple episodes of TOS that are without question among the best episodes of Star Trek ever on television.
Yeah. Which I've heard.
Yeah, which you seriously need to watch.
I will actually sit down and watch.
I mean, I can't remember all of the ones I mentioned to you.
Let me see if I still got
there
the
were two specifically. The two that I'm definitely thinking of that you should watch, and that you, the listeners, should definitely watch if you haven't, are Balance of Terror, which is when the Romulans first show up, and it's a fantastic episode. It's got this like submarine hunt feel to it, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's great, tense moment. Some of the early TOS episodes, you had Kirk is like the super genius, and he just like wins by being so much smarter than his opponent, and his opponent is an idiot. Whereas in this one, they actually made his opponent also be quite smart. I mean, at the end of the day, spoiler alert, Kirk doesn't die and he outsmarts his opponent.
Yeah.
But they gave him a really good opponent as well in the Romulan captain.
Which, it's always weird to me as I read about classic Trek where people are like, Kirk's so super smart. Where I'm just like, I've never got that vibe from him. Not that I'm like, he's an infidel, or he's an invalid, or he's dumb, or anything like that. Like,
only one of those words that you just listed
would be correct.
Yes,
yeah, that's fair. I sometimes words, Dave.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
But yeah, I never got the impression like switch gears for a second. I remember on Friends, there was a joke where I think Rachel was trying to bother Ross or somewhere where she was like, Kirk's smarter than Spock, and then Chandler's like, you're joking about that Spock thing, right? I was like, how's that even a conversation? Like, I've watched the movies. Dude is not Spock's level. It's a different intelligence where Kirk, I'm like, if you were to describe Kirk as smart, I'd be like, well, yeah, he's street smart. He's very active smart. He's got. I wouldn't think of him as math smart, but
no, he's tactically smart. He's got the tactics. I mean, one of the
not strategist, but in the moment tactical.
Yeah. He's got a brilliant tactical mind,
and that's something I think they've done well in the new movies.
Yes, but also one of the things that they did well in the new movies that wasn't always the case in the original series is that in order to make Kirk look smart. In the original series, they would often just like, okay, now you're going to interact with an admiral who is clearly an idiot.
Yeah.
Because the evil idiot admiral, that is a Trek tradition going all the way back to the beginning.
Right.
And so it was like, well, yeah, he's smart because everybody around him is an idiot. Whereas, I mean, they did a lot of less good things in the new movies, but one of the things that they at least did was that instead of making Kirk smart because everyone around him is an idiot, they made the people around him smart. And
he just infidel, right?
Yeah. They made the people around him smart, and he was just smarter.
Yeah, or smarter in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that was one of the things that they did well. And Balance of Terror, to get back to the episode from our rabbit trail, his opponent is actually smart. The other episode...
City on the Edge of Forever. I'm reading the text right now.
Perfect. City on the Edge of Forever is just... It's a phenomenal episode. It's a time travel episode.
Another trope in Trek.
Yeah, it happens a lot. Trek trope.
Trek trope. Which, in that amazing episode from DS9, Trials and Tribulations, I think it's episode 504. So just go on Netflix and watch it.
Also time travel.
Episode. Also time travel, and at the beginning of the episode, because they go back to Kirk, the people from the time travel department of Starfleet are like, dude was a menace. And they list off a bunch of times. Sorry, please continue.
But anyway, it's a time travel episode, and they go back in time and they inadvertently cause a change that prevents the Federation from even being formed, and they have to solve that. But there's a bit of a moral dilemma involved. I don't want to give too much away,
right.
But it is just it's a fantastic episode. Great character stuff. It's really good.
Nice.
So yeah,
and
watch. please
I will.
do yourself a favor
I will.
and watch those 2 episodes.
I will. Jill and I have just had a very busy time.
Yeah. That goes for those of you listening too. If you haven't watched those episodes, you need to.
And the other one I've heard to watch out of Classic Trek is I can't remember the original.
It's the Tribbles episode.
Yeah, the Tribbles episode. I think it's called The Trouble with Tribbles or something.
Trouble with Tribbles,
Trouble with Tribbles. But in my opinion, just watch the superior one, Trials and Tribulations.
Just watch both.
Yeah, watch both.
I mean, it's a funny episode.
DS9 really won me over. Like, I love me Next Gen. So your favorite film, you said, is First Contact.
Yeah.
What's your favorite series?
DS9.
Okay.
I loved the just Dominion War arc.
That's fair.
Everything. I mean, the nice thing was you actually had an overarching plot versus a issue of the week type problem.
Which DS9 setting really lent itself to.
Yeah.
Because it was the idea, like, look it up on, dang it, what's it called? I almost said Wikipedia, but that's the Star Wars one.
Yeah.
But the Star Trek Wiki, I wish I could remember the name.
Memory Alpha?
That's it.
Memory Alpha.
If you look up Memory Alpha, you can read stuff about the seasons and the changes the writers, and that stuff is all crazy interesting to me. But where they were like, it was the idea of it's a saloon, where it was the Star Trek Western, where here's the setting where it's a saloon with the same characters, but of course you're going to have people popping in and out. That's what.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to get revisiting characters. I mean, on Next Gen, you didn't have that many revisiting characters aside from Q, who appeared like in first season they used a lot, and then they used him sparingly and better in later seasons where he'd show up once or twice a season. Listener, you can't see the look on his face, the wrong look on his face.
Wrong look.
Dave is not a fan of Q, which is wrong.
No. Well, okay. Yes, I am not a fan of Q.
Yeah.
No, I am not wrong in my opinion.
I love Q. And then, but outside of him and Loxana Troy, who is nobody's favorite.
Oh, gosh.
And a couple other characters, and Wesley after he left the show as a full-time cast member, because their whole thing is like, we're out on an adventure, we're in this corner of space this week, and next week we're in another corner.
Right.
But when you're on the same bloody place,
yeah,
the whole 7 seasons.
And it actually makes sense to have recurring guest characters who appear and grow. Yeah, that's the thing. You have DS9.
Everybody grew on DS9.
Yeah.
Similar to Next Gen and Voyager, but on DS9 it was very different. I'd say there was more growth because even Gul Dukat, he grew exponentially over the show.
And I mean, not that there's exactly heavy competition for it, but he definitely wins the Best Villain Award.
Yeah, I don't
for Star Trek.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant for DS9. I was like, is there many other DS9?
So the other
hardcore villains?
The other villain that I think is fantastic in DS9 is Wayun.
Oh yeah, Wayun, the clones.
Yeah. He's just
no,
he's hilarious.
He's
and
fun.
that actor, I want to say his name's Jeffrey Combs, although I could be wrong about that.
I think it is.
He just does a phenomenal job. He plays a recurring guest character in Enterprise, also fantastically.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he does a fantastic job with Wayun. So that's the thing, is not only does it have good recurring characters, DS9, it's got great recurring villains.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice when you see the villain and you're like, oh, I'm happy to see them. Also, wait a minute, no, that person's evil.
Yeah.
I mean, Dukat, they do a really cool thing where for a long stretch of time it looks like he's got a redemption arc going, and there's a little bit of an anti-hero thing working, and
he kind of starts off as frenemies with them, and it's not till late, even as they're on opposing sides, on the few times they talk they're still frenemy-ish.
He's charismatic, and so that kind of bleeds through.
And the other thing that DS9 did great was redeem the Ferengi.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Which, before we segue, because that's a great segue point for me. I'll say, like, out of the movies, excluding the new three, out of the first 10 Trek movies, it's almost a tie between First Contact and Wrath of Khan, and it's different. Like, both are pretty tied evenly for Trek films, but then taking it necessarily out of the Trek films and putting them up against other movies, they're great movies. They're ones that you can refer to other, like, to non-Trekkies to be like, look, just sit and watch this. It's relatively isolated. You don't need to have a huge foreknowledge of what's going on.
Yeah.
But then also, I can't help but give so much credit to Wrath of Khan, because it's an amazing... I'll say it. I think it's an amazing film on its own. It's a great film. But then also, in comparison to what came before it, it is one of those sequels where it is exponentially better than what came before it. That's normally not something that happens. Most of the time, you're like, okay, you get a good sequel. You might get a good sequel that doesn't hold that's still not on the first one's level. Wrath of Khan is like, if Trek the Motion Picture is the floor, which it's not that much higher than, because I think Trek the Motion Picture sucks. Like,
what, you didn't appreciate 40 minutes of just like slow motion glory shots of the Enterprise?
No, I did not.
I mean, like, I'm sure it was great.
The best thing that came out of Trek the Motion Picture was the theme for The Next Generation. Let's just leave it there.
Yep.
The score was amazing. The film was awful.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that Roddenberry was not allowed in for production for the following films. Look at Trek the Motion Picture. But then Wrath of Khan is a great film, and there is a lot of tension between an antagonist and a protagonist who never actually share the screen together, who are never actually in the same room at the same time going to blows. And it's an interesting thing because it's a guy who's Kirk's physical superior. Because when you think Kirk, you think, I'm going to roll in the dirt and punch the bad lizard costume guy in the face. Or current Trek, because Pine's awesome.
Yeah.
But that one, it's like, it made Kirk have to think. It made Kirk have to go outside his box, and then, because in a one-on-one fight, it's not even close. Khan would mop the floor with him. It'd be almost like the Next Gen trope of, Worf's our strongest guy, now let's have the new baddie throw him across the room.
Yeah.
That's what would happen. You've got that aspect. It's a fun movie. It takes Trek to a different spot than it had been in the show.
Yeah.
So it's out of especially the TOS movies, it's the one I probably go to the most.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's got a good villain. It's got a smart, clever villain.
That takes, and then it's not like it's a species or anything. It's just this one guy who was introduced in the show, not even in a huge episode from the show.
I've watched that episode, and it's a decent enough
and it was a one and done
episode. It's neither a particularly good nor bad episode.
Yeah.
But just whoever was behind Khan managed to go like, hey, we can do something with this.
Yeah.
And did something phenomenal.
Yeah. It's I watch a lot of classic Simpsons because I have seasons 4 through 8 on DVD, and then there was one where it's like Star Trek 12, so dang tired. And then it's like the Klingons, again with the Klingons. And that's something that I think the original movies did go. They went to the Klingon well a lot. Because it's Trek 3, the Klingons with Christopher Lloyd. And Kirk's son, spoilers, dies. And Spock, in the title, spoilers, comes back from the dead. And then Trek 5,
yeah, but I mean,
Klingons. Trek 6, Klingons. 3 out of 6 movies. And then Generations. Guess who shoots down the Enterprise? I'll give you a hint. It's some rogue, bloody Klingons.
But Chris, like, you haven't heard Shakespeare until you've heard it in the original Klingon. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon is kind of awesome.
It was fun. I'll give it that.
Yeah.
No, it's just the original movies and the show. Like, I get it. The Klingons were the big bad because they were at war. But still, it was just a well that they kept going to. And it's something I appreciated with Next Gen and then DS9. Less with Voyager. And this is, once I'm done this is the segue I was talking about. Like, the Next Gen movies, the Next Gen show, and DS9, like, really tried to introduce other species. Like, to give them credit, there was the horrible misfire of the Ferengi, but they were like, it was at least trying to do something new. It's like, okay, we got the Vulcans, and 8 or 9 times out of 10, the Vulcans are great, they're logic, they're not jerks, 9 times out of 10.
We're not going down this rabbit hole.
And then it's like there's the Romulans. They're popular, but they tried other things, and DS9 ripped open that door to be like, here's someone you've never met.
Yeah.
And the DS9 only once used the Borg in a flashback sequence in the first episode, and it was great because then you're like, man, Cisco had it rough, and then also it's like, dang, the Borg are gangster, which they already were.
Yeah.
TNG, I'll give TNG credit. I think they used the Borg the best, and they established like an enemy, probably the best, or at least tied with DS9's use of the Dominion.
Right.
So, the segue that was mentioned 5 minutes ago is now happening now. What do you think were some misfires along the way?
In a specific show or...
Trek.
So, one that I'll go with in terms of, I think one of the biggest misfires was Voyager not delivering on its concept.
That's a great one.
And I mean, I've watched Voyager all the way through, and I enjoyed it. Like, it's a good series. It definitely has some flaws. It's got, some bigger ones. But my biggest problem with it overall was that, the premise is that we are so incredibly far away from home, and we're on our own, and we've got limited supplies, and it
turned out to be unlimited over the course of 7 seasons.
Yeah. And they never really delivered on that premise. For the most part, and I know I've said this before, the premise was used to make jokes about how bad Neelix's coffee was, I think, because they had replicator rations. Like, they delivered on their premise with continuous jokes about, like, Neelix's cooking, which they all had to eat because they had limited replicator rations, and that was about it.
You don't want to include Neelix in the misfire? I'm kidding.
He's not a terrible character. No. Actually, I enjoyed... He was okay.
He's not as annoying as some Trekkies make him out to be.
Yeah. I found, actually, character-wise, a slightly larger misfire was Kess.
Yeah.
She just never really did anything until they were like, we're just going to get rid of her.
And nothing against the actress. Like,
she just wasn't given much to work with, I think. But so that was my... I enjoyed Voyager, and it's not to say that it didn't have some other issues or whatever. It was a decent enough series. It was fun. But it never properly delivered on its premise. If you watch... I think the one that it often gets compared to is Battlestar Galactica, the new one, because Ron Moore...
Really? I've never watched Battlestar Galactica, but I've found if any Trek show gets compared to Battlestar Galactica, it's DS9.
Well, it's DS9 because Ron Moore worked on both.
They shared a headline.
I think one of the reasons why BSG sometimes gets compared to Voyager is because it's a similar concept. And it's not entirely the same, but like in BSG, all the human worlds get blown up, and then they're like running away, and they have limited supplies, and and so there's that. The one that the show that I most frequently compare it to would be Stargate Universe, which you haven't watched.
No. I also didn't watch Atlantis, and I think. Because you and Mom, and then especially you and Matt Percy from Cardboard Cornelia, shout out, like really went through. You're both super into Stargate. There's so many bloody sci-fi franchises.
Well, it's because you're out in the stars.
At this point, we could just abbreviate being like Trek, Wars, Gate. No. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I think I only watched like 5 seasons of. SG-1. Like, I didn't even see it when Anubis came in. So
Right.
I was just aware of it.
But I mean, so to give you a brief rundown of the premise in universe, our group of heroes and humans from Earth, they get transported onto some ship, created tens of thousands of years ago, and it's in another galaxy.
Okay.
It's not even in the Milky Way. And they are on the ship. They can't control it. It's kind of on autopilot, and it's going where it wants to go.
Oh, okay.
And they go through. They can't control the ship. They have, limited resources that they brought through with them. They can't go back home.
Huh.
So they're journeying, and they've got limited supplies, and they can't go back home. And you've got this, a similar thing where you have civilians and military,
right.
And there's a little bit of a kind of a power struggle there in terms of like, well, who should be in charge of things? Which, not that you would have that specifically on Voyager, but where Voyager had a comparable situation was the Federation and the Maquis.
Yeah, yeah.
And Stargate and Star Trek are incredibly different.
Yeah.
And yet, every time I watch Universe, the entire time what's running through my mind is, this is everything that Voyager should have been.
Maybe he studied it and was like, okay, let's not repeat those
mistakes. I don't know, but it's just, and that for me is a sad thing about Voyager,
right.
Because the premise, you had so much, and it just never delivered on it.
Yeah.
For the most part, you have one or two episodes that are exceptions to that. Year of Hell, for instance.
I've heard about that. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, I've watched Year of Hell.
Yeah. That's the two-parter episode, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, I'm going to blank on the name of the episode, but it's when they run into the Nova-class ship that came through slightly before them.
Right.
And those guys took a very different turn in dealing with their situation.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that I wanted, the crew of Voyager to become these, like,
warlords.
Like murderers who kill interdimensional beings to power their warp drive. But also, it was one of the few episodes in which the situation that they were in really played a part in, driving who the characters were and who they became. And so there were a couple episodes that delivered on that premise and were amazing for doing so. And so for me, it's just like, why couldn't all 7 seasons have been this?
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so I'm going to say a couple of mine. I think the Ferengi and Next Gen that was definitely a misfire. Just because, of course, like, when you look at the Ferengi, you don't think, like, this is a threatening, conquering species. So then, how they redeemed them, especially through Quark, in DS9, was nothing but a stroke of genius. Because now you're like, there isn't another species like them in Trek. Where their whole thing is like, they've made a god out of money, and it's all about profit. Like, it's just about profit. They will do shady things to make a buck. Yeah. But they'll also, if it's in their best interest to make the most money, they will support a good party, because for that's it.
Yeah,
that's Ferengi.
They're the antithesis to the Federation.
Exactly, because they're still very much a sexist culture. They are everything the Federation is not, but not in terms of being warlike.
Yeah.
So that was, I love that redemption. Misfire, a number came in Voyager. As we were talking about DS9, we were like, the setting allowed the reoccurring villain to work. TNG worked with the Borg as a reoccurring villain greatly, because they were so few and far between. The Borg showed up, I think, 5 times on Next Gen. And there was only 2 times where it was 2 episodes in a row.
Yeah.
There was normally a separation of a whole season. So they didn't get ruined. In my opinion, the Voyager, the misfire there was bringing in the Borg. On one hand,
they brought them in too much.
Yeah, because on one hand, you're like, that's great, that's exciting. Holy crap, we're going into Borg space. And then the problem is, because you're like, Voyager's going to get home. It's every time we encountered the Borg lost their menace. Because it wasn't like we outsmarted them, or Q pulled them back, or we like Jean-Luc, as still somewhat a Borg, gave us an in to like trick them essentially, or Hugh, or anything that. Like it was just they were out and out beaten. And the Species 431 thing was cool because you're like, what?
Yeah.
But then once you got outside of that, it was just like, it's this crew who have the power of the writer's room.
Yeah.
And then, so...
look, they were equipped with plot armor. I mean, it's the strongest armor there is.
Exactly. Like, that's the thing. And then, to go back to the DS9 example, though, like, DS9 had recurring villains because the setting allowed it, and it made sense. Next Gen did have reoccurring villains, but it was few and far between. Even the friggin' Moriarty. Yeah. Like, he showed up few and far between. And he could have shown up almost, not every week, but more frequently, because they use the holodeck all the time. But Voyager, for its first 2 seasons, had a reoccurring villain who showed up in a bunch of episodes, and it was...
the Kazon dude.
The Kazon.
Which...
was a misfire in terms of frequency, was a misfire. It was just a misfire.
Oh, yeah.
For me, as much as I don't like how much Voyager reused the Borg, Voyager became something I enjoyed watching essentially around the 3rd, 4th season when they brought in the Borg, because then it kind of got more streamlined and more of a focus, I felt, where it's like, okay, now Trek, out of any show, has growing pains. Like, normally it's the first season that's the weakest. Sometimes the second as well. And that holds true for TNG Season 1 and a bit of Season 2. Deep Space Nine Season 1 is definitely rough around the edges. But Voyager's first 2 seasons are, to me, at times unwatchable.
I think part of the problem is with the Kazon is that they're not a good villain.
No.
One, they're not a good villain in general. Like, no. They've got, like, a space fleet and can move around, and yet, in the first, 10 episodes, they're after Voyager because Voyager can make water for them. Like, they literally, they want to steal Voyager's water or something because Voyager has replicators and can make water. It's like, you have ships capable of traveling faster than light, and you can't find water in space. There's lots of it.
Weren't you just on a planet that had water?
Well, when they first met, they were on a planet. Right. There was, a desert planet for the most part. But, there's lots of ice in space.
Yeah.
And you can apparently travel faster than light. So there was that. And also, if there is a Star Trek show where it doesn't make sense to have a recurring villain, it's Voyager. Because Voyager is essentially, for the most part, pointing the ship at Earth and then traveling at warp speeds towards it. Now, yes, they emerge from warp speed every single episode because they want to
watch a constellation.
They have to watch a constellation or explore a nebula, and I mean, they do, in fairness, make the point that, look, it's going to take us
70 years.
70 years to get home traveling at maximum warp. Maybe we should go a little bit slower, and we'll find something that will help us shorten that journey.
Yeah.
So, cool, fine, but as a general rule, if I'm pointing my ship towards Earth and flying at, way faster than light speed, I shouldn't be running in to the same Kazon guy on his ship every other week unless he's following me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to have the same Kazon guy be your recurring villain.
Yeah.
Whereas, at least with the Borg, they're not running into the same Borg person every week.
No, exactly. It's the Borg. We are the Borg.
Exactly. And so, as much as I didn't like how much the Borg appeared, they made a lot more sense as a recurring villain.
Absolutely.
Because they occupy oodles of space, and we know they can travel faster.
Yeah.
So, it makes sense for them to keep running into the Borg. It made almost no sense for them to keep running into the same 3 Kazon captains time and time again.
Now, to give Voyager credit, and I think you'll disagree, but I'm right.
We'll see about that.
My favorite episodes of Voyager actually have to be the ones with Q. Only because I think I'm
making a face
of
disapproval.
You really don't like Q.
No, I don't.
I love that character. he's so fun. He's very much a chaotic neutral, and that's what I enjoy about the most with him, because he just goes up to mess with Jean-Luc, but there's normally a reason that you find out later, aside from just like, I'm feeling pranky.
Just so we're clear, the best episode that ever had Q was the DS9 one, where Cisco punched him in the face, and then he never came back ever again.
Which, I think it would have been weird if he came back. It was almost a weird episode. I like that episode with Q, but out of Q episodes, it was a weird one, because suddenly Q is just like, well, I'm kind of in love with this person, and I'm chasing her. And it was very ineffective.
Oh, yeah.
In comparison to Q on Voyager, when he has this crush on Janeway, and it's hilarious. Like, Voyager had some very comedic moments, but the apex of them was Q anytime he flirted with Janeway.
I'll give you that. It was funny.
Outstanding. Especially the first time they meet, where he's chasing the other Q, who wants to commit suicide. It was a season 2 episode. They stumble upon a Q, who they later name Quinn, just so you're not like Q1, Q2 or anything.
Right.
And then when Q is talking to Janeway, he's just like, has anybody ever told you you're angry when you're beautiful? And then just showing up in her bed and her freaking out, and then especially the one where you find out like he wants to create a new Q, but he feels it's with humans, and
right,
trying to pursue Janeway the whole episode just cracks me up. And then they handled it very well, because here's a character who could easily take them home, and the writers were like, how we want to bring Q in, but how are we going to do it when he can solve this problem? And then it was John Delancey who's like, but he wouldn't. They'd be like, take me home, and he'd be like, no, that's not how you're getting home. That's not how you're supposed to get home. And then that's it. And then you just get the fun of Q interacting with these characters. Because I find the thing I like about Q is he makes stuff happen within the show in a very different way than normally happens within the show. So it can get to some interesting territories. Anyways.
Sure. I'm not... Don't get me wrong, John Delancey does an amazing job, and there are times when he there are definitely comedic moments that arise because of Q.
I must protest. I am
not a merry man. Yes.
So good.
Oh yeah, actually, most of the times when he interacts with Worf, it's
Eat
just
any
it's
good
hilarious.
Books recently?
Yeah. I'm not a fan of Q as a character. Like, they basically were like, oh, we're going to make God, but we're going to make him kind of impish because I guess we will. And I just never, liked it.
That's fair.
Is effectively what it boils down to. And I found him annoying for the most part. There were comedic moments, but I was just like, eh.
See, I always, when I watch Next Gen Season 1, you could probably put in as a misfire. Just because but I don't want to, because Next Gen to me is great. I never answered my favorite series, and I think it and DS9 are pretty neck and neck.
Okay.
Because there's times where if I want to just throw Trek on, that's not a movie, I'm going to Next Gen. It's the comfortable one. It's the chicken noodle soup.
Well, it also has for the most part, one-off episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can just watch one episode and not care.
Exactly. Whereas DS9, the one-off episodes are few and far between.
And they're the weak points of the series.
Trials and tribulations.
Well, those are the exceptions. And there's some great character episodes in DS9 as well that are relatively one-off. But, there's also, a half-decent number of kind of, skippable episodes in there. And the skippable episodes tend to be the one-offs.
Yeah. Other misfires. To me, Enterprise, to an extent, I didn't watch it like you did, so I'm not trying to throw it under the bus. I'm understanding that there were debatably two, but definitely one great season and half a good season, if not a full second good season, but seasons 1 and 2 were rough. To me, the beefs I have with Enterprise are tenfold in Discovery, which to me, the whole thing is a misfire. just burn that show to the ground.
Wow.
Sorry. No offense to the cast and crew. Like, the cast is... I've watched the first 2 episodes. I could barely get through them. The cast was great. The crew and the special effects are very well done. But, sorry, I'm going to rant I'm going to rant on Discovery. But Enterprise... the issue I have with... if you're going to do a prequel, you have to do it well. And then there's a lot of traps you can fall into with prequels. Where it's like, let's bring out all the references to what's to come so then it can get you excited as a fan. Like, when you're in prequel territory, a lot of the time, like, fan service. A great example of this is the friggin' Hobbit movies.
Yeah. I mean...
which, Discovery, but Enterprise, it had. I have a love-hate relationship with the Borg episode.
Oh, it's so good.
It's a really good episode. But it just, to me, it creates some issues where you can debate which we won't.
It gets into a bit of a predestination paradox.
Which when you're involving an entity that exists outside of time and space in Q, makes it complicated.
Yeah,
as a sequel episode to...
But Star Trek, just to briefly jump down this rabbit hole, like, Star Trek has dealt with predestination paradoxes before. And it's not the first time. It's not the last time. I specifically remember an episode of Voyager where, and I don't remember the name of the episode, but it sort of deals with time travel, and they get into a sticky situation,
right?
Because they got into it in the future. So they see a ship that's trapped in something and needs help, and they try to assist it. And then themselves. They get trapped, and it was themselves. Yeah. They're stuck there in the future.
Yeah.
And, like, literally Janeway has this thing from her, like, temporal mechanics class or something, and it has something to do with, like, sometimes in time, whatever,
which
the effect comes before the cause.
If you're...
And so, like, and I'm not saying that makes predestination paradoxes okay as a thing, but... this is something that Trek has done before and is comfortable with. So it's not like this is a new thing to Trek to be establishing a little bit of a predestination paradox in an episode involving time travel.
But their whole thing is a lot of the time when there is... so much of the time in Trek, they're like, this could be a predestination paradox. We need to avoid this. We don't want to create predestination paradoxes. And then it's also, for me, the difficulty of you're now involved... like, you're making a predestined point involving something that that was the cause from something outside
the
linear time. So then it's like, here's this circle, and now you're grouping something else.
Well, then you just never should have created the horrible god character of Q, and your problem is solved.
Or you just take out a line of dialogue at the end that solves all the problems.
To defend Enterprise, and Enterprise is oddly enough, and it's my second favorite Trek series.
And to give it credit, it had a great cast, a great crew with interesting characters.
Yeah.
For me, where I consider it a misfire is it got, I think it tried to do its own thing, but while being almost a bit of a slave to the continuity.
Actually,
and then trying to introduce stuff from continuity from further that they never had first contact with, the Ferengi, all that, and then yeah.
I mean, oddly enough, most of first of all, the vast majority of all my problems with Enterprise are contained to the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So, of the 4 seasons, the first 2 were definitely weaker. There were some good episodes in there. There really were. But I think for the most part, it actually wasn't... My biggest problem with it was they had this, like, temporal Cold War.
Right.
Which was the main storyline of really the first 3 seasons.
Yeah.
The only reason I sort of tolerate that timeline or that storyline is because it gave season 3, which I loved. But my problem was that it felt like it seemed like that storyline was twofold. One was it gave them an excuse to not have to worry about continuity as much, because we've got strange actors from the future trying to influence the past, so things are going to be different than they otherwise would have been. And so, like, okay, it's kind of annoying,
Right.
but I get it. And then the other thing was, it sort of felt like the story of humanity's first proper warp ship and actually going out and exploring wasn't exciting enough on its own.
Right, yeah.
And I didn't like that. Season 3 had this overarching story of the Zindi and was absolutely fantastic. I really liked that. The whole season just felt like this race of, we need to solve this before the Death Star destroys Earth. Oh, sorry, the Zindi weapon.
Yeah.
But it's still
The
fantastic.
Species 431 thing.
And then the other thing is season 4 has some of the absolute best episodes of Star Trek, period. There's some really good, just classic Trek. Like when you think of Star Trek, the TNG or the TOS, this going out and exploring and learning new things about the universe and about ourselves. Season 4 of Enterprise has some absolutely great stuff on that. And you get to see the beginnings of the forming of the Federation. You get to see humans coming into their own and, being diplomatic in terms of solving problems between other species.
Right.
And it's a great stepping stone to see how the Federation eventually gets formed.
Right.
That part is really cool. It's also really nice because especially in the first 3 seasons, humans aren't perfect. Like, we're close, but we definitely have some shortcomings, and you can see them get over those, which is just really exciting.
Before we segue into why Discovery is awful, because I just hate it. I hate Discovery. Hate's a strong word. I just really, really, truly don't like it. One thing that is, I think a lot of the fan base considers this a giant misfire. And I get it, but I can understand the position that the producers were in, is the Enterprise series finale, where... Now, to be fair...
what season finale? I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. It never happened.
No. See, now, here's the thing. As I've read it, and it's something I liken to almost the Office, where in season 9, you had a 2-parter, and then the 2-part series finale. And then I look at it like, the 2-parter before, that was the season 9 finale, because... the series finale was like, we're a year later, or roughly that, and that's how we're ending. And then the producers were like, that was our intent, because by that point they were like hoping that it would get renewed for a 5th season, but they became aware that it was not going to happen.
Yeah, so I mean...
So then they were like...
what happened was, with that specific episode... was effectively because when Enterprise was being ended, it was the end of Star Trek on television, and it was the end of years.
To give them to apply the context, like Nemesis had bombed. It had just bombed in theaters because this was 2003 or 4. Nemesis came out in 2002. It was going up against Lord of the Rings. And there was an unfortunate track record with the next-gen movies of each one did less significant, less well financially.
Yeah.
So Nemesis kind of came and went. It bombed out of theaters. So they weren't sure what was going on with the movies. And then Enterprise was canceled. So that whole huge Trek renaissance that had just happened from 1987 onwards, where the film franchise was dead in the water, and now the TV one that was also going concurrent with that was now dead.
Yeah.
So to them, it's like, we kind of have to say a farewell to the franchise.
They wanted the series finale of Enterprise to serve as a
possible farewell.
As a Star Trek finale. But they were limited to a 1-hour episode instead of the 2-hour one that they wanted. And so instead of a good series finale for Enterprise, we got a a holodeck episode of TNG.
Yeah.
And it, yeah.
Yeah. And as I've read, like, I think some people had, like, the producers, Rick Berman and I can't remember, but who had Rick Berman was shepherding Trek from midway through TNG. Like, he was the creator.
Roddenberry?
Yeah, I'm brain farting. Like, fully brain farting.
Wow.
Yeah, no.
I don't think you're allowed to put this episode on your podcast.
I said Roddenberry earlier. It might have been negative, but I said it. Like, Roddenberry, like, he had been right-hand man to Roddenberry from Next Gen's first season.
Yeah.
And then as Roddenberry stepped back, Berman stepped in more. And I think it was Braga.
Yes, Brennan Braga.
Brennan Braga. And both these guys, I think they had a lot of good intentions. But it's also interesting with the Trek at that period, it was going through a weird time of it had been on the air consecutively for 13 or 14 years. Each season.
Maybe like 16 or something. If it
Yeah,
ended in 03.
Right, yeah, because it was in 87. So the films were doing less well financially. And the shows, rating-wise, were doing less well. Like,
Yeah.
As you compare DS9 to TNG, as it's going, viewership dropped. And then as you compare later seasons of Voyager to DS9, viewership was dropping. And then Enterprise started well. But there's definite fatigue there.
Yeah.
Because it was going nonstop in film and on TV. So they get a lot of crap. Like, they get a lot of crap. But that move I can definitely understand. But it might have benefited if they had done a clearer job of the preceding episode being the clear, like, season finale.
Yeah.
And then somehow done a...
Well, and I mean, I know, like, a lot of... Like, I make the joke of, like, what finale? And there are people who, in some ways, rightly or wrongly, consider the preceding episode to be the series finale for Enterprise. And, I mean, it functions half decently as one because they sort of resolve their issues, and are ready to take the first stepping stones towards creating the Federation. You can kind of see that by the end of the fourth season, where it's clear where this is headed. And so it's not. It wouldn't be a great finale, but like it's a semi-reasonable one.
Yeah. Well, for any show that kind of finds out midway through shooting that it's not, you can't bank. It's not like Next Gen, DS9, even Voyager. Like, they knew they were getting 7, and they knew they were stopping in 7. Like, it was a show decision to stop.
Yeah.
So they could resolve it as greatly as they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Enterprise was going for 7. It didn't make it.
Yeah, which is sad because what they could have got to. I really am sad that we're not going to get the stories that they would have told in those following seasons. You've got the Earth Romulan War.
Yeah.
That would have been really interesting, and then of course the actual. Hopefully, eventually, they would have touched on the actual founding of the Federation.
Yeah.
Which would have been great.
There was also a planned episode where it would have been how the Borg kind of got the Queen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which is weird in Enterprise, but
they
whatever.
brought back the Borg, and people loved the Borg as much as Voyager kind of lost some of their luster. All right, so I'll say it briefly. To me, Discovery is a giant misfire. I don't like it.
So, I'm not... Okay, I can't defend it. I will say a couple things. One, you should watch more than the first 2 episodes.
I'll try.
I made it to the mid-season break of the first season, and it definitely got better.
Right.
And I've heard that the second half of that first season gets even better than that. So it definitely improves, is what I've heard. I don't know because I haven't watched it yet. So at the end of the day, I don't despise it, but I didn't enjoy it enough that I ever bothered going back to the mid-season break. I've watched stuff with the cast, and it's it's clear to me that there's a lot of people who love what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
who really enjoy Trek. You see interviews and stuff with people, and they talk about like some of these character like the cast members are watched old Trek
Yeah.
in order to
Carl Urban is a guy from the movies who's like a Trekkie.
Yeah.
Because he will bust out like deep cut references.
Yeah.
Simon
Pegg.
Simon Pegg, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like a guy. It's almost like on the Marvel front or any comic book movie where you come across a guy who's read more than like the 10 recommended issues
Right.
to get a
But
grasp
I mean,
on the
you
character.
get like there are some of the actors in the series come in. And, when they were cast, they had never seen an episode of Star Trek in their lives. But then they were like, oh, I'm going to,
do my homework.
do my homework.
Yeah.
And then they get, a couple episodes into insert series here. And they're like, oh, this is amazing. I love this. And so there's a ton of people involved in it who legitimately enjoy Star Trek. And I mean, I know one of the issues you have with it, which is one of the issues I have with it, which is how the Klingons look.
Oh my goodness! Well, to be clear, why I consider it such a misfire? It's mostly writing.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the cast or crew. I'm intrigued, but to me, where it's a misfire is I've got a lot of issues with the writing. Trek itself is a franchise that really almost prides itself on how much it sticks to continuity for the most part.
Yeah.
Because the Trekkies will rip them a new one anytime they deviate from continuity.
Yeah.
It's why Trials and Tribulations was so painstakingly recreated, because they had to recreate everything. Because they're like, none of the sets exist anymore, none of the props exist, or very few. We have to track them down because they will kill us, essentially, if we do this wrong. And with Discovery, I feel like you can tell there's a care here, but it's almost like there's not the care to the continuity that there should be.
The effectively what they did, for better or worse, and I think you and I are both on the worst side of this, but is that they threw out visual continuity. So they
hugely.
So, and I mean, I don't agree with that decision, but I can understand ish.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand the concept of look, it's not technology has improved since the original series was made.
Yeah.
And we would rather make a show that looks really good than try to make something that looks like TOS. And when people such as yourself say one of the reasons that I have a hard time watching TOS is because how it looks sort of pulls me out, I can understand the impulse.
I can understand trying to television is a very different medium now than it was in TOS, and it's still an evolving medium from the time it was in TNG.
Yeah.
But we're not talking there was a big difference between the Klingons in the motion picture series and TOS. And then they found a way to address it without addressing it in the DS9 episode, and then in Enterprise they figured out a way to incorporate that into it.
Yeah. Which was fantastic, by the way.
It's not even just the visual. It's not even, the visual. It's also, that's a huge visual.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not even talking, special effects-wise, because I get it. You've got a much higher budget than any Star Trek show you've had before. Yeah. Or you're taking what they did from Prelude to Axanar and doing great special effects on a limited budget, because you can do that. But it's not even here's great special effects. It's here's everything different. The ships barely, if at all, resemble the ships that came before.
Yeah.
The Klingon warships look drastically different.
Yeah.
The Klingons themselves, frankly, look terrible and look nothing like the Klingons that you're going to see in continuity.
Yeah.
In years later. And to my knowledge, they haven't really done anything to try to address how these things look so different. And the aspect of the main character, Michael, being Spock's stepsister, I have a lot of gripe with. Because Spock's a main character who mentioned his family pretty often. Like, we knew his family. We knew his family. So, here's this unnamed character that we've never mentioned before that we are now going to shoehorn in. And then in the second season, bring in Spock.
I don't. So I disagree with you on this one. On the one hand, I think it was unnecessary. To
me, it could have been
like
a Vulcan stepchild. Or like a human stepchild to a Vulcan. I am absolutely fine with, but it's a thing with previous movies where it's like where prequels and stuff where it's like, let's force this connection to someone from before so we can then get the care that you have for them on this
don't
character.
necessarily like. Okay, there are good, valid reasons why it makes sense to have Spock's family to be the adoptive family. One being that Spock's father is married to a human woman, and I can definitely see there being a reason why he wouldn't talk about it. I actually just, I'll say 3 weeks ago, watched the episode that introduces Spock's parents. And when when Kirk meets Spock's parents, he doesn't know that those are his parents, and Spock is never like, "Oh, this is my father, Kirk." I think it's Spock's mother who has to be like, "Well, he's our son." And there's this, at least in that episode, there's definitely a gulf in the relationship between Spock and his dad, and it gets resolved over the course of the episode. But there's some distance there, and so I can see there being a like, the Vulcans are quite private, and I mean, clearly Spock doesn't even think it's necessary to introduce the Vulcan ambassador as being his father. So given that, I don't think it's not entirely unreasonable to have Spock have had a stepsister, an adopted stepsister that he never mentioned. Is it likely? No.
Well, also considering
but it's
Spock
not
died on screen and his family showed up for that.
But maybe she dies later. Like, we don't, the point is I don't think it's entirely beyond the pale.
Right.
Is it the best decision? No, but it's not unbelievably, it's not unbelievable.
Right.
Effectively is what it boils down to for me. So that part's fine. The visual thing with the Klingons drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Largely just because it's so unnecessary. And I think, and it almost speaks to, I think, oddly enough, what defined a lot of Trek, especially TOS, and even other series, was the limited budget that they had. Whereas now technology has come so far that, like, you see interviews with the guys on, like, the arts team and the costume team for Discovery, and between 3D printers and, like, the stuff that you can do on a computer now, they can do whatever they want.
So now it's an excess.
And now it's an excess, where they basically let the art and costuming team, they were like, go, do whatever the heck you want, be free. And no one at any point ever thought that, hey, maybe we should, like, rein them in.
Whereas, to give, again, total kudos to Prelude to Axanar, that's a great way to have earlier Trek ships look like they did in TOS, but in better definition.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how familiar. So if you're listening to this and you don't know what the heck Prelude to Axanar is,
look it up. It's a fan film on YouTube. It's about 20 minutes. It is friggin' excellent.
Yeah, it is not even remotely canon.
No.
I mean, okay, it's not canon because it's not official, and therefore it's not part of the actual story.
But it could be.
It could be. It's incredibly well done.
It's about the earliest skirmishes between the Klingons and the Federation. And it was inspired by, like, the creators didn't like the new movies too much, so they're like, this is how you could do Trek on a similar budget. Where visually, it looked a lot like the Trek 09, Into Darkness, and Trek Beyond. but it was to them much more true to the spirit of Trek.
It managed to have updated visuals while still looking like it belonged in the same
Yeah.
universe as TOS.
Yeah. Whereas Discovery, not at all.
Yeah.
And for me, like when they first announced Discovery, before they announced what Discovery would be, they were like, there was a lot of thoughts going around. And I loved the idea. At one point, it was being discussed as an anthology series where I'm like, friggin' color me interested. Because there's a lot of periods where if you can do a prequel but keep it limited, I think that serves it. Where it's like, let's focus on this period in time for a mini run of 5 to 10 episodes or less. I'll say it, I've said it before and I'll say it again right now. The episode run should serve, the story should inform the episodes, not the episode run informs how long the story is. And then if you wanted to visit stuff about the Enterprise B that we only saw in Generations for all of 5 minutes.
Or C.
Or C, which we saw in the amazing episode Yesterday's Enterprise.
Yeah.
Shout out. Fantastic episode. Like that would have been interesting to me. But with the visuals and all that, I'm just like, you guys should have just done a Star Wars Legacy idea.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Yeah, no.
Oh.
It's a specific reference. Before Disney bought the rights to Star Wars, and then bought the comic rights from
Dark Horse.
and sold them back to Marvel. Dark Horse was running the Star Wars comics, and then there was in the books there was the Legacy line of books, but then it was inspired. It then inspired the comics run, where Star Wars Legacy takes place roughly 100 to 160 years after Return of the Jedi, or one of the most recent points in the books. So it's far enough removed that it was borderline carte blanche with they could do whatever they want.
Okay.
It's Star Wars, so the story is cyclical in nature. It's always like the Jedi are few in number and the Sith are taking over. There's an empire and there's a rebellion. That's Star Wars in a nutshell. But it was removed enough that it didn't have to be a slave, like really be a slave to stuff that came before it. It could work in organically references to the past, but without being like, crap, we've got to honor the past. Well, we're in this position now where not only we have to serve the continuity for what came before us, we can't dent or ruin the continuity for what's coming after.
Right. And I think kind of to sort of ish touch on that, like to relate it back, is that yes, it can be really difficult to tell a story and be a slave to continuity. Mm-hmm. But sometimes when you allow yourself to be confined by that, you end up with really good storytelling.
You can.
Far,
I just haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I said, I've watched 2 episodes.
But I think part of the... what I'm saying is part of, I think, the problem with Discovery is that they didn't allow themselves to be confined by some... At least visually, they didn't allow themselves to be confined by the canon. Enterprise got really good when they stopped giving themselves an out to ignore canon. Right? The first 2 seasons... I found were really weak, and it was they had this temporal Cold War that allowed them to, we can do an episode about the insert random thing here that they should have no business knowing about.
Right.
Because we have an excuse. Whereas season 4, when they were finally done with the temporal Cold War business, it got really good. And Star Trek, I found, has, when they, not always, but oftentimes when they allow themselves to be confined by the canon, they get good storytelling out of it. And when they just decide that they can do whatever they want, they get so excited being able to do whatever they want that they forget to tell a good story.
Yeah. To me, Discovery has been a misfire. One of the things, and I'll ask you this after I've said this, it's not what I wanted out of Star Trek. So, out of the future of what I want out of Star Trek, at least on the television front, because I don't know what's going on with the movies. Because right now, Trek number 4, the movie, is in limbo. Because Chris Pine has apparently walked away, because Paramount wants to play it cheap. They were bringing back George Kirk from the dead, so Hemsworth was coming back, but they want to do it on the cheap with him, so both are like, we're out. And I don't know how you're going to do that movie especially without Kirk.
Yeah.
So the movies are kind of up in the air. What I want out of Trek, and we might get to an extent out of the Jean-Luc Picard show, which I am thrilled about. That is the most exciting Trek news for me out of the most recent years. Is I think so many people are eager to get back to the main universe after Trek. Like, it should be in the Prime universe and not in the Kelvin timeline, where I'd be excited about that story. Not because it's in the Prime timeline, but because you had an event in the start of Trek '09 that, to me, shakes up Trek
The
and
destruction
shakes
of
up the
Romulus.
galaxy.
Romulus.
Because Romulus is done. And they've explored it a bit in the comics, and I'm understanding about in Trek '09, in Trek the Online.
Star Trek Online. That is what they deal. They deal with the fallout of that.
Like, so that to me is a huge storytelling perspective. Where if you want to incorporate, and I know people are like, don't incorporate action into Trek. Action has been incorporated into Trek since Wrath of Khan. But if you want, and onwards. But if you wanted to do that more organically, that represents it, because you're now in a universe without Romulus Prime. These adversarial species is now gone.
Well, yeah, maybe they're not gone, but they're certainly dealt a major blow.
Possibly on the verge of extinction. That is a power that is now removed. So that that's
creates a power vacuum.
Which you've got the warlike Klingons who have been at war, in peace, at war again, and then at peace with the Federation.
Yeah.
Who might be like, we're season control. We're going to take this sucker.
Yeah.
You could easily incorporate, like, the Borg is like, you know what, they're weak, we're going to do this. They could easily do it. You could come up with a way to have the Dominion try to come back, whether or not that would be good. I'm not saying.
Oof.
But and that part would probably be the weakest, admittedly. But that, to me, that setting creates so much story potential that it makes no sense to me why we're still in the prequel territory.
Right. And I mean, based on where the Romulan Empire was, too, you could have other... you have space for some other species or power
to seize control
from the other side of the Romulan Empire, you know, in the Beta Quadrant or whatever.
Exactly. You can introduce the new villains. You've got so much opportunity there. And then if you wanted to further remove it from, like, the other thought is, like, if you wanted to further remove it from Trek '09, but still have that be the point, you could do the legacy thing and set it like 160 years later, where the Klingon ships can look like they do in Discovery.
Yeah, I think the issue with going further forward into the future, and which was one of the reasons why Enterprise went back, is that, especially you got this, it became the case as you went further and further in Voyager, or in Star Trek in general, Voyager just being the biggest example of this, was the episodes that revolved around technobabble.
Yeah.
Insert techno problem here. Now by the end of the episode, we figure it out and we resolve it. Insert technobabble here. And the other thing was you had, by the time you get to the end of Voyager, you know that in the future there's a temporal prime directive and there's a group of people who go through time to make sure that, like, we observe the timelines. And as the technology improved, quote unquote, going through the show, you had more and more episodes that really revolved around technology as opposed to, like, finding a good character-based story here.
Now, is that a problem of Trek, or is that the problem of writing?
I think it's a little of A, a little of B.
Okay.
In that it's not a problem with Trek specifically, but as you get more and more of it, one, it's a temptation that it's easy to fall back on as a writer, and two, if you go too far forward into the future, you now actually have to address the fact that you have, like, a group of people whose job it is to monitor the timelines. Right? And so that's not something you can necessarily easily ignore if you're going to follow the continuity of what was established in, say, Voyager, where you had Captain, I can't remember his name, who was always upset with Janeway for screwing up the timelines.
Chakotay?
No. He was some, like, captain guy from the future who was always coming back to be like, you're messing things up. And he was a Federation guy because the Federation, and so the one thing that I fear with going, especially if you go 150 years into the future again, is that not that you have to fall into all these traps, but that it's going to be a lot easier to fall into those traps. I like the idea of jumping forward again because it gives us space to tell the stories we want to tell.
Yeah.
But you run the risk of falling into a lot of the same traps you did before.
And the difficulty with Trek in comparison to something like Star Wars is because it's based on Earth and Earth history. You can do another Star Wars thing and do Knights of the Old Republic, where you go backwards and it's so far removed, because then you're like, well, we're now just in Earth history and this is pretty boring.
Yeah. Well, no, you just go back to the 1960s. That's what they always do.
So what are your hopes out of Trek? Like, and Jean-Luc show?
I for the most part, I in entertainment in general do my absolute best to avoid all news about anything.
Here's the news. There is a Star Trek show coming about Jean-Luc. That's the only news.
I know. But for the most part, I don't want to set expectations. I don't care about rumors or early script things or whatever, because whenever it eventually arrives, I just want to enjoy it on its own merits.
That's fair.
So, I mean, Jean-Luc's cool. So hopefully the show is good. I would like to see Discovery get better. I'm hoping it does, and that I'll get back to it. I mean, I had the opportunity to watch the second half of the first season, and I never really bothered. But let's be clear, most of the Star Trek seasons, or most of the Star Trek series, had a really weak, at least first season, if not first two seasons.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's unbelievable for Discovery to
course correct
and become a really good show. That's the one thing that's currently ongoing. That's the thing that I most hope for. The one or two random bits of stuff that I've heard from season 2 makes me less hopeful, but we'll see what happens.
That's
Again, I generally try to avoid most of that stuff so that I don't come in with preconceptions.
That's
and so I think that's what I would most like, is largely just because that's currently ongoing. I would like that to get
good.
Well, or get better, like improve. That
involves me complimenting the show.
I want to go and watch it and get caught up.
Yeah.
Is effectively what I'm saying there. Whereas right now, I don't dislike it, but I guess at the end of the day, I don't really care all that much.
That's fair.
And I want to care. I want to know what's going to happen. And so, yeah.
That's fair. All right, I'll quickly close with a couple others I thought of out of my kind of wish list. With the Jean-Luc show, it's going to take place after Enterprise, after Next Gen.
Maybe it'll just be a big long all holodeck episode
with Patrick Stewart playing every role. No, I'd love to see I'd love the opportunity to revisit some of the Next Gen characters, because I love those characters. I'd especially love Q to show up. I know you would disagree, but the Jean-Luc and Q dynamic is weirdly one of my favorite things from Next Gen. The way they play, the way those two play off each other is always entertaining to me. And the few times that they have and some of the times they've interacted in the IDW ongoing comic series, like the writers and artists have captured that dynamic perfectly. So whenever I see it, I want it more. And you can also you could definitely make a joke in there, just because there's a line in Next Gen in the first episode with the Borg, Q Who, where he says, I am ageless, Picard, you are not. John Delancey has aged decently well. Patrick Stewart has not aged at all. So, and Delancey's like, I'd love to come back, but I've aged. We're
going to have to address this.
We're going to have to address this. And I was like, if you're ever going to address it, addressing it with Picard would be the way to go. And I just hope for an entertaining show. Movie-wise, I want them to figure it out, because as much as Beyond was great.
Beyond was fantastic. I loved it.
And I don't think we're in the minority, but there's not a majority.
I think a lot of people are just still angry about
it's different,
09, and then especially Into Darkness. And if you can just like get past those two,
I really
Beyond was fantastic.
I really dig Trek 09, but its problem was because it's like we're in this brave new world where we're free from continuity. They're like, not really, because we have to establish. So they're not a slave to continuity, but we've got to establish. So it didn't get to explore its own territory. And then Into Darkness, I still enjoy. There's elements that I really like, and friggin' Benedict Cumberbatch as Khan, I'll take. I will happily take, because his performance I loved. But its problem was it's a slave to Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
So Beyond was the first of the new three that got to live up to its premise of being its own thing while still honoring Trek. It was the most Trek. It had a captain's log for more than a minute.
Yeah.
It started with a captain's log.
Oh, it was great.
And outside
it was a
of
captain's
Beastie
log.
Boys destroying stuff, which I was fine with.
Well, not only that, it was a captain's log chock full of references to TOS.
No, exactly. And I really dug Beyond. And I know
Yeah.
some people, the sticking point was Beastie Boys destroyed it. I'm like, that's a reference to the movie. Like, the current movies and how just there. And I'm like, it's light, it's fun. Is it dumb? Yes, but it's not the dumbest thing I've ever seen in Star Trek, because it didn't involve going back in time to save some bloody whales. Because the satellite shows up that only speaks whale.
And let's be clear, that's in the top half of the better half. Like, that is one of the better movies.
It's one of the better Trek movies. Like, it's dumb, but it's fun. It's a well-made movie, a very well-made and very
I'm just surprised that
enjoyable
the
movie.
what is it? The international translator, universal communicator, universal translator can't speak whale. Like,
for real. Like, when you take that premise off the paper, you're like, this is pretty dumb.
Yeah, look, just save the whales, my friend.
Yeah, no, and the next one, then Trek 05 should have been about recycling, saving the universe.
Yeah.
Because 90s. We've digressed. So, while Beyond would have been a great note to hop out on, I'd love, movie-wise, for there to be at least one more in the Kelvin timeline to wrap it up. And kind of, if it's back to the Prime universe, then awesome. But I'd love a way to just kind of give a good note to leave that one on.
Yeah, I mean,
like
Beyond,
a planned note.
Yeah, Beyond was... I
was great.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
it was really good.
One
of the
Trekkies,
things...
you're going to come for me, even though I'm one of you for the most part. I put Beyond in my top 5 Star Trek movies.
Just remember, when you come for him, he couldn't even remember Roddenberry's name.
Even though I said it earlier, disparagingly, because he was limiting and some of his story ideas were boring. He made Trek the Motion Picture, and it's one of the worst Trek movies.
Just remember that when you come after him.
That's right. I put Trek the Motion Picture roughly around the level of Trek 05. Wait, not Trek 05. Trek 5. Final Frontier. The one that Shatner directed that is terrible.
Yeah.
Is the motion picture as terrible? No. But it is so boring. Roddenberry.
But anyway,
sorry, I do like
Beyond. Beyond. I really liked. It was great. It tied in really nicely with Enterprise in terms of some of the continuity there and that sort of thing. And again, I think this is another example of Trek being good when they honor continuity.
Yeah. Now, also, but to give Into Darkness some credit, I have to give it. They had a number of Trekkie moments. The working in of triples made sense. The reference of Section 31 I loved, and it was also similar to how Section 31 operated in DS9 times.
Yeah,
where it's like the blops of Trek. So working in those things, which unless you watched through DS9, you had no idea who the hell Section 31 was, and the triple is a decent callback. It's definitely the worst of the three.
Oh yeah,
but to me, it's not even. It's still more enjoyable than Final Frontier, Search for Spock, and Trek the Motion Picture.
I'd have to rewatch some of those. I mean,
Generations.
Okay. The motion picture is boring.
So boring.
But at least there's an original story there.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Where there isn't an Into Darkness.
No, that is fair. Oh wait, you mean Kirk dying and Spock being the one to yell Khan isn't original enough for you?
That was
John Harrison being a misdirect?
I mean, that was one of the
Khan
few things
being
I
a
enjoyed.
white dude? Which, although he was in Wrath of Khan...
wasn't he kind of like Hispanic-y?
Well, he was very Hispanic looking in Starseed, but he was very Caucasian and buff.
Yeah, at no point did he ever look like he earned
British.
the last name Khan.
Yeah.
But,
no.
whatever that is Trek.
Yeah, that's Trek. Cool. Dave, thanks for having the discussion with me. Trekkies, I honestly do consider myself a Trekkie. I do love this franchise. Don't come at me too hard. We are a very fickle fan base, and up until recently, I'd say we were the most fickle fan base, although the other fan base I am very much in. Star Wars gives us a run for our money in terribleness.
So what you're saying is we should have a new competition between Star Wars and Star Trek.
Well, we are...
Of whose fan base can be more fickle.
No, I think we should become less fickle. And the Star Wars fan base needs to ease up on attacking actresses for playing a part.
So what you're saying is we should let the, high ideals of Star Trek inform us?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Or Q.
That's the moral of the story. No! The moral of Q's story is have infinite power and be kind of a jerk with it.
But a jerk who helps people do right things in the end?
Yeah, no. I think, if you want... Yeah.
He did the right thing in the end in a number of his episodes. While stirring the pot, that was so much fun to watch.
I think the moral of Q's story is get Worf to say, Sir, I protest, I'm not a merry man.
Or what can I do to prove to you that I have no powers? Die. All right, so Dave, thank you for joining us. Just to give people an update, aside from being my brother, what are some of the things you do?
Well, I'm an accountant, which is my job. That's what I, do for work.
Yep.
I also like board games.
Sure.
So to give another shout out to Cardboard Koinonia, Matt and I chatted about board games recently. So
you were just on one of their not a vlog, but a video.
Yeah, one of their YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So if you like my sweet, wonderful voice, you can hear some more of it there.
You can also actually see what he looks like.
Yeah, but really, it's the voice.
Oh my goodness.
So I enjoy board games, Ultimate Frisbee, and then the other thing is I work as the treasurer for a small charity.
Nice.
We're called Bolivian Children Foundation. We work with an organization in Cochabamba, Bolivia, that runs 2 kids' homes. And so we work with them, looking after kids from a variety of backgrounds who can't be with their parents for a variety of reasons. Some of them are orphans. Some of them have been removed from their homes because it's not safe for them to be there, and others it's just a case of the families can't feed them. Mm-hmm. So we with our partner organization down there in Bolivia, we have 2 homes, a boys' home and a girls' home, where we care for them. It's absolutely great. So Bolivian Children Foundation.
And dear listener, if you'd like to check them out and get more information, I'll make sure. Do you guys have a website?
Yeah, we do. BolivianChildren.ca. That's
Perfect.
nice and easy.
And I will attach that link in the description of this episode. Dave, thank you for joining us. We'll definitely have you back because we talk Star Wars a lot, so we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And then we'd love to do one talking about the Bolivian Children's Foundation and your experiences, because you did a mission trip before. That's what got you involved in helping get this set up. So we'll unpack that next time.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Dear listener, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation on Star Trek that went a lot longer than planned, but that's how we do.
Yeah, that's usually it.
Yeah, no, seriously. We'll be like, let's chat for a couple minutes, and then 3 hours later.
This episode better not be 3 hours, because I'm currently looking at the runtime, and it's not that far.
No, it's not that far. But
so we suck at saying goodbye if this makes it to 3 hours.
Yeah, no, there's not going to be an hour and 15 minutes of silence. No, there won't be that.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, we'll attach that. Dave, thank you for joining us, and we'll have you back. And Dear listener, you're awesome. Thank you for listening and supporting One Cross Radio. And as always, if you get the chance, feel free to hit up our coffee site if you'd like to support us financially in what we do. Or if you want to get some sweet merch, hit up our Redbubble store. Or hit us up on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for listening. Hope you all have a wonderful day. And God bless, my friends. Take care.